Hey everyone, it's Braulio Rosa, Executive Director of the Broward County Bar Association, and today is May 31st, which is the end of the month, obviously, but it's also the end of Asian American Heritage Month. And here at the Broward County Bar Association, we definitely we enjoy and we totally support the idea of celebrating diversity. And I didn't want to miss the end of this month without us having a conversation with two of our great leaders here, not only in Broward County, but throughout the state. I'm honored to have first the Honorable Natasha DePrimo, our Circuit Court Judge. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, the one and only Jay Kim, who is on the Board of Governors for the Florida Bar and the Executive Committee, correct?
That is correct. Thank you for having me.
And of course, he hired me like 10 years ago, so yeah, I am partial. So anyhow, I wanted to talk a little bit about both of your careers and also your experiences as you've gone through it, which, you know, obviously being Asian Americans, with there's a history, right? There's a history of anti-Asian sentiment in this country and, you know, dating back to, I guess, the 1800s. And then I thought it had waned, and maybe I could be totally wrong. You know, it wouldn't have been something that I experienced. But then with the pandemic, we saw this huge uptick in anti-Asian sentiment. I mean, just hate. And so I really feel strongly that as the Bar Association, we should be educating folks. And so thank you for spending a little time with me. And we'll start with Judge DePrimo. So Judge DePrimo, tell us a little bit about, and I know you have to be cautious being a judge, but just some of your personal experiences. You know, you were appointed, and then you had to go through that re-election. So kind of maybe talk about that.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And of course, I'm so honored to be here. For me, it's always interesting because, you know, I was the first Asian American judge, female judge here in Broward County ever. And I always say that I can't wait until we don't have firsts anymore. The Honorable Judge Singhal was obviously the first Asian American judge who was here in Broward County. He's now since left Broward County to go on to the federal bench, but I was always honored at least in my history of my judicial career, to have been the first Asian American female. I will say that for me, going through this process, in particular what you asked about with regards to the election, it was during a time period where there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment that was out in the world and being talked about. And as you said, as a judge, you know, we don't have the ability under the canons to really discuss those topics or even to defend ourselves in those situations because it's really part of our public role. But it was something that, for me, I had to at least discuss as a mother with my children. And I think, obviously, I was a member, and I still am actively involved in APABA, which is the Asian Pacific American Bar Association. And, you know, in that organization, I always felt that there was a lot of discussion about, you know, what experiences people had gone through. But for me, during the election time period, during such a increase in anti-Asian, it was quite interesting to have that discussion with my children to say, listen, sometimes people say things that are unkind. It doesn't make them true. It doesn't make them okay, but we have to learn from them. We have to educate. We have to go into settings like this and talk about, you know, that I'm the same person. I'm a human being. I'm the same as everyone else. And so that was something that I think I had not dealt with, at least not in my judicial career, that I had to address during that time period. So it was different.
How did it feel talking to your children about these sort of things? It's not something that I would think as a mother you look forward to, or you think, oh, I'm going to talk to my child about being a little bit different.
Well, and you know, in particular for me too, because I grew up in a Caucasian family. So, you know, my parents were divorced when I was very young, and my father is the Asian side of my identity, basically. So for me, it was a discussion with my children to say, you know, these are the things that may be said to you. These are the things that may be said about me. And it doesn't mean that it's okay. But I didn't want to get too involved in it with them because they are still, my older ones now are a little bit older, they understand it more, but back in 2020, they were still young, and it was during the pandemic, so it was already stressful enough, and then add on to this idea that there are people out there that are saying really unkind things solely about the way I look, because it's not anything about me, even culturally, because I grew up, as I said, in a Caucasian Jewish family. So it was really hard to explain to my kids that this is only about how I look, and it's okay that, if you want to talk about it, we can talk about it as a family. It's okay to have a discussion. And I think that's part of this process, is making it okay to have a discussion. Oftentimes when we speak at these events, one of the things that I always say is, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to ask. One of the questions that people ask us, and we've discussed this in other forums, but where they say, where are you from? And that doesn't really mean, where am I from? I'm from Long Island, New York. I'm from Jupiter, Florida. I'm from Broward County. And, but what they mean is, what is your nationality? And so sometimes it's just the way you phrase it is not meant to be insulting, or I don't think most people that ask you that question mean it. Even sometimes they'll say, where are you from? Really to give you a full description of what they mean, And I always just say, do you mean my nationality? And it's that small correction where they'll say, oh yes, that's what I mean. And my hope is that the next time when they ask somebody, that they won't ask, where are you from? But they'll ask, oh, what's your nationality? So that's something that I kind of talked about with my children as well.
I wouldn't even call it nationality, because I've been there, and we had discussed before we got on here about, different but analogous, being like the only Puerto Rican kid growing up in a very white and Asian neighborhood. The joke back then was, did you have a switchblade, like West Side Story, because every Puerto Rican had a knife, so I could relate. And I eventually came up with, because I used to say nationality too, and it's not a nationality, because I'm an American. I was born and raised here in this country. It's more of, where's your heritage from? Like, where did your people first come before they came to this country? And it's really just tiring. But Jay, tell us a little bit about your experiences moving up. I mean, you're a prominent attorney here, not only in Broward, but in the entire state. And as I said, you're at the top of leadership at the Florida bar. So tell us a little bit about your experiences.
Well, thank you preliminarily for hosting this. I think this is an important discussion. Thank you to the Broward County Bar Association, as always, being a leader in these types of discussions. I consider myself to be very fortunate. Most of my life, I can't help but stick out, but most of my life has been drama-free. There has been isolated incidents of things where people just can't help themselves. But I think that by and large, statistically speaking, it hasn't been something where I feel like, oh, woe is me, because I know that there are a lot more people who are victims of far worse. And going back for 1 second to Judge DePrimo's election, I saw that firsthand. And I thought that she handled it with such grace and aplomb and professionalism. She never sank down to anybody's level, never, reacted out of anger or anything like that. That's the way you handle an election. And the results speak for themselves. So, a lot of times people just, it's never going to change. I think in the beginning part of this podcast, you said that we thought we were kind of over it. Personally, I don't think it'll ever be over, because I think we as a culture, maybe as humans, which is a negative sentiment to say, but we're always going to kind of see people who are different. I don't think it's necessarily anti-Asian, although in that particular moment it is. It's just it's what you call xenophobia. It's anti-different. It's anti-foreign. And a lot of American culture, and I would say, look, let's not just blame America. I would say that a lot of the world is about us versus them. And a lot of the political talk is about well, it's not our fault. It's look at the people who are coming and taking our jobs kind of mentality. That type of rhetoric that causes people to blame the outsider or who they consider to be outsiders. And so speaking of that, I mean, I know that unlike Judge DePrimo's background, I grew up in an Asian household. Meanwhile, my friends were all white, mostly white, and Jewish. My high school friends are all Jewish, and I tried to blend in. Of course, that is what is the term? You're just failing right out of the gate. You're not going to actually blend in. I'm the only one being fooled with that, and it just takes an errant comment for me to just land right back on earth to say, oh yeah, I forgot. Right, that guy in the mirror. That's not blending in with anybody. But as I said, my career has been a blessing, and it hasn't been like when you're trying to work. You don't deal with that normally. I don't see that. And lawyers are different than the general public, which is why Judge DePrimo had this really negative experience when it comes to an election. And of course, I was kind of elected in a less public forum, but I mean, I was elected from the voters, lawyers of Broward County. And anonymity does a very interesting thing to you. It gives you certain courage that you would never have if you were to actually be able to have to stand behind your words. And so there were certain comments that were made in the election that I'm sure that person, whoever it was, would have never said to me to my face. But be that as it may, I don't take those things too seriously because I know human nature. But I do think that there is a critical need for continued awareness and education. The only problem, of course, is that I think we're always preaching to the choir. I think the people who listen to the Broward County Bar, who are involved in the Broward County Bar, don't need to be educated. They're the ones that should be out there preaching as well. So we're always preaching to the choir, regardless of whether it's about diversity, whether it's about supporting an independent judiciary. Everybody is on the same page with that. And so, we need to keep doing this, but we need to find a broader audience.
Yeah, I agree. Same with professionalism. We talk about professionalism, and it's like the same couple hundred people or whatever that show up to these programs. But hopefully, the Broward Bar is a statewide leader. I mean, I'm partial. But I would love to see us spread this word to the other voluntary bars across the state to continue educating because they've got their own audiences in their own circuits. What about the Florida Bar? Can the Florida Bar in any way work with the voluntary bars to educate?
Well, the Florida Bar does what it can. It certainly is one of its primary objectives is to encourage diversity in the legal profession. It just can't do too much with that. With not just that, just in general, it needs to kind of stay within its lane in terms of what it was designed to do. It is an arm of the Supreme Court of Florida, and so while it may have lots of different initiatives, it needs to be a little bit more restricted in what its activities are. The Florida Bar sections, however, are a lot more free because they have independent memberships with paying members who are deciding on their own to be a member of those sections. So those sections have a little bit more leeway in terms of their activities. But the bar itself, they have to kind of restrict their activities so that they're not falling outside of the what's considered to be the core activities of the bar.
Yeah. So you had talked about Judge DePrimo experiencing a larger audience because you're right. It's a different audience when you're running for the Board of Governors with lawyers. So Judge DePrimo, you're out there, and you're exposed to the whole public, and people can be anonymous, right? They can sound off, which is it's terrible. How is there anything we could do to? Probably not, but what can we do to try to educate, to try to mitigate some of that?
Well, I think it's forums like this. I think it's having a candid discussion where people don't feel judgment when they ask a question. Oftentimes, most times when people make a comment, they really don't necessarily come from a place where they're trying to be disrespectful or they're trying to say something that seems just on the verge of being too far. It may be that that's what they heard when they were growing up, and so to them it's something that they know is very commonplace. One of the things that I found for me in particular was, and Jay will know this term, but in the Asian community, when you are half Asian, there's something what they refer to as a hapa. And one of the interesting things is it's almost like kind of like you're not a full Asian, right? So one of the things that I also was presented with is, even because the election is so many different people and so many different cultures, that when I would meet people in the Asian community, they would say, "You're Asian? But you're not enough Asian, And so
you just can't win.
Right, and I would be in these settings and I would think, when they would say, "Oh, but you're just a hapa," and and those are just as hurtful, even though they're not designed to be hurtful. It was really, just kind of a conversation that people were having with me, like, well, what's your nationality? So I always would say, when I would, talk to my family about it, one of the hardest things, even just growing up, forget being a judge, but growing up, it's that I wasn't Asian enough in the Asian community, and I wasn't Caucasian enough for the white community. So I never fit. And I think part of these conversations is talking about how nobody fits. Everybody has, as you said, your background with being Puerto Rican and that cultural kind of upbringing and how that made you feel, and everybody has their story, their thing that makes them unique. Having these conversations about it's okay to be different, it's okay to be unique, it's okay to be the first, because there will be others that will come behind you, because it's supposed to be okay to have that kind of diversity. So I think that's one of the things that I learned from my judicial career that I didn't really experience as a lawyer. I had the here and there commentary. Most, I think, of the derogatory statements about an Asian female, at least that I received, were more about Asian stereotypes for women, passivity, certain sexualization of women, Asian women. So I had some of those experiences throughout my legal career, but it wasn't until I became a member of the judiciary that I really felt this was about the way I looked when I entered a room, that I did look different, or people trying so hard to figure out what I was, and that's why I said back to, like, where are you from? That was something that I had not experienced really, not to this degree, and not by so many strangers, people that didn't really know me, and I kept thinking to myself, well, why not ask me about what I do for a living? How do I serve our community? All the things that I want to give back, how hard I work, But people were more interested in how I looked and where I came from. So that was something I kind of had to learn. And as I went through this process, and I appreciate the compliment, Jay. I really do, want people to be able to have a discussion and feel okay about it, that it's okay to talk about everybody being a little bit different, and that you don't have to fit into whatever, box that everybody else wants you to fit in. You can be a little bit different, and that's okay, and I think that's why these discussions are important, And
I think that's really interesting, because I think at bottom, people are just trying to figure you out. Not just the judge, just in general, as we move through life. We're just trying to figure out what we're dealing with. And some people just want a shortcut. They want to be able to put you in a category and say, okay, you're this, this means that you like these types of things and you don't like these types of things. When we do jury selection, isn't that like something that we're trying to do really quickly? It's not perfect by far, but I think that's what a lot of people are trying to do when they say, I want to know, like, what are you? Like, so I can try to figure out, well, what do you expect, and what do you like, or what don't you like? Maybe they're trying to keep you happy, right? You're somebody that people want to keep happy, and so maybe they're trying to figure out. I don't know, but that's, I think that's kind of a lazy way of saying I want to understand who I'm dealing with, and maybe they're trying to jump to conclusions. I don't know.
I mean, first of all, America is one of the few countries, and I know there's some others, that we're a multicultural country. So many countries, everyone is X, everyone's Y, everyone's Z, and that's it. So to give credit to America, because this is not an America bashing time podcast or discussion, because America is a great country. The fact that we're here and that we're successful means that it's a great country. So we want to continue that process, right, of making it even better. So with that, I think you're onto something, because we all do that, right? I think that's inherently human, dating back probably to when we were, hunter-gatherers, where you learned certain things and then you could box it, and that's how you stayed alive.
Right.
You
Survival.
knew these kind of people, that tribe of people that lived over the mountains, they'll kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So, avoid them. Or these people, they're friendly and they'll trade with you. I think that it probably dates back to those times.
I think you're right.
So tell us about, you said the Florida bar can only do so many things. So give me some advice, or how can I help spread the word maybe through the bar world to get other voluntary bars to educate? Because I know people are often, they're not as maybe bold or courageous or whatever you want to call it, to get out there and have these discussions. But I think it's crucial to have these discussions. I think we as a bar, we need to lead the way.
Well, I think that the important work is being done at this level. Voluntary bars are the ones that are on the ground doing the actual work. They're the ones that are meeting the constituents and making changes. They have the face-to-face contact with the judiciary, and they can do far more than the Florida bar alone can do. Now, having said that, the bar has committees that are designed for diversity and inclusion. We should definitely have many representatives in those committees doing the work. The bar needs to have a constant source of information as to what's going on in the local communities, so that it can make better policies. If there are professionalism issues having to do with discrimination, clearly the bar needs to know about that, because it needs to start forming policies to be able to combat some of that, and maybe even deal with that on a disciplinary level as well. The bottom line is continued involvement, continued representation at the Florida bar level, and of course, to continue to do this kind of work locally, and it's every bar. The Broward bar is the leader, but there are so many smaller bars that need to continue, and years ago, they used to call them affinity bars. I don't know if they still do that or not. Minority bars may be the appropriate term, but everybody has their own constituent that they need to represent and promote and protect in many instances, and so they have to keep doing that. And then they will send, hopefully, their representatives to the Florida bar to continue their work there.
So, Judge DePrimo, can you give me some advice on how myself and the bar, how we can educate the public by possibly working with other public officials? Jay had talked about how we educate the legal community, but the broader audience is much larger and it's a different animal. So how do we do that?
Well, so I think obviously the Broward County Bar Association is unique. It is always at the forefront. We were at the forefront when it came to, kind of implementing the new Zoom procedures, everything, professionalism. I do feel like the Broward, and I attribute that, Braulio, you really should get a lot of credit, because you are the person who puts it in the forefront of the conversation. When I was in county court, obviously I was the representative for our circuit, and we got to meet judges from across the state. And there are so many different facets of Florida, just Florida, if we talk about, not forget the entire United States. But one of the things that I found so interesting is how eager other bar associations are to expand their educational programming, but maybe don't have the resources or really the ideas to kind of tack on or to do onto their already established programming. So I think one of the things that you do that I think is something that, of course, you should continue to do is that you have allowed other, at least in my opinion, other counties to kind of come in on an event that you're already planning, so that this way they don't feel that burden of having to establish something from scratch. But even when we talk about something like this, like diversity, or when we have an event that honors, our African American judges, our Hispanic judges, all those types of events that, if you wanted to reach out to our tri-county area and say, we would do it with all 3 counties. There's no reason that it could just be Broward. It could also, we could include diversity, because that expands who you're reaching, right? And now you're not just, because a lot of our lawyers don't just practice in Broward County, they practice throughout the state. And now, especially with Zoom, they're practicing even more than Tri-County. They're practicing all the way up to the north of the state. So I think that would be something that I think you already do, but I think that could even be something that continues that progress, so that when we have something like this, a discussion honoring Asian American Heritage Month, that we can have an Asian American judge from Orange County, which is the next county that I have, that I know of, that there's an Asian American judge, where then it's, even broader of an audience. That's the only way, I can think of that. But I know you already do that, so I think it would just be an expansion of what you're already doing.
I think so crucial. I could see us, I don't mind taking this, boxing it up, and handing out to every single bar association
Right.
across the state. This is not to generate revenues. This is to educate people. So I would hope that, and maybe that's the offer to all the bars, including the Florida bar, if they wanted to put it out there to educate. In Orange County, it'd be great. Maybe we can, I'd love to do it in person, though, and not
Yeah.
do it on Zoom. I'd like to be able to have that judge come here or meet that judge somewhere in between and do something.
Judges. I think
Judges.
Orange County is
Yeah.
actually ahead of Broward.
Really?
There's more than one.
Wow.
Right.
So we basically have you here in Broward, nothing in the Tri-County area other than
Judge
DePrimo.
Blackman also.
Well, Judge Blackman,
yes,
technically, that's
and then obviously myself and Judge Singhal. Even though I know
Who's-
he's on the federal bench, he's always obviously, because
right.
he was the trailblazer for us.
Sure.
And then the next kind of group of Asian judges that at least I have met throughout the state, you don't get to until you get to Orange County. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's kind of limited.
Yeah. Well, what was so great was APABA, before COVID, had put on this wonderful installation dinner down in Miami.
I
And
remember.
we had judges from not only obviously Broward, but we had them from across the state, and they were honoring basically Asian judges from across the state. And it was so wonderful to see this diverse group of Asian American judges on the federal bench as well as on the state court side, all on a stage together, kind of sharing the microphone and talking about what it's like in all of their different locations and their stories and how it got there. I think a lot of awareness is just remembering that, yes, we are members of the judiciary, but we're also people. And we also have, stories that got us to where we are. And same with lawyers. Usually if you have a conversation about, where you're from and your background, it just makes it more professional, because people are more less adversarial, even though that is the nature of obviously what we do, but also cordial at the same time. So some of it is just having these types of conversations with a larger group of people, basically.
And it helps demystify people, like we're talking about earlier.
Yeah.
You can, you get familiar with people, and one of the things that I think we've made a lot of strides in terms of how many Asian lawyers there are now, in general. APABA's membership, APABA's reach in South Florida. There are other chapters throughout Florida as well. And of course, there are other chapters of the National Asian Bar throughout the country. But APABA South Florida started off as a tiny little bar in Miami, and it's got a much greater reach now. And so those are accomplishments. And one of the things that we need to continue to do is make it not unusual so that people aren't like, wow, that's such a weird sight. I've never seen an Asian judge before. They need to not have that reaction when they first walk into a courtroom. Yeah. It needs to be not an anomaly, you know. It needs to be like a normal thing, so that people aren't like trying to like figure out what do I do with this person, you know. It needs to be a normal thing, and so it will happen. It takes a long time, you know, but
it's a cultural shift over time.
It's normalization. It's not sticking out like a sore thumb, like I did in high school, you know. But it's just a matter of time, and you know, I hate to like get down to this level, but I mean, you know, these shows on Netflix, where they have all these shows that are happening, that kind of is part of the normalization. People are watching all these Asian shows and they love it, and yeah, it's foreign, but at least it's not something that they're like, I can't believe, I don't understand what this is. It's becoming normal. So it's part of the process. And I think it's good.
I mean, suddenly they had the Crazy Rich Asians. It was this movie that was all Asian, all about Asian. Yeah. I don't think that had ever been done before, something like that.
I think that might have been, I think they billed it as like the first time it was an all Asian cast or something like that. I mean, probably not the best message.
No,
but yeah.
And the Korean shows on Netflix, all these Korean shows.
Yeah, so and that kind of goes towards, you know, having people's experiences be that they have some of this additional foreign culture enter their lives, so that it's not so foreign anymore.
Right.
You know.
And
so,
I do want to say, I know we were talking about in particular with the election that, you know, these were very isolated negative incidences that I had. They were very few and far between. I can tell you that from my perspective, the majority of the people that I met were wonderful. Part of going through an election countywide is an experience where you get to meet so many different people of so many different backgrounds here in Broward County. And so I just wanted to give it that caveat, because the reason we're focusing on it is because we're having a discussion about it. But I would say that, like Jay has said, they are not an everyday occurrence. This is something that was just during that time period in particular had a little more of an effect because of what was happening with the COVID pandemic. Right. I think going through an election during that time period where there was a lot of xenophobia kind of out being discussed in the world, it was something that had to be addressed even in those isolated incidences that I think might have been a little higher than they would have been had we not been going through COVID. But I do want to give that little bit of a caveat that, you know, we're focusing on it because obviously that's the discussion that we're having. But overall, the experience that I had was really a wonderful experience of meeting people here in Broward, and it was an honor. And it is an honor for me to serve in our county. You know, to me, being an Asian American on the bench is important because right now I feel like I, of course, always want to see diversity in all ethnicities. So for a long time I was the only. And so, you know, now it's nice to see that we're already progressing. And as, you know, Jay has said, that we'll continue that process of promoting all different types of ethnicities and nationalities. You know.
Well, look, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, you're here, you're reelected, so obviously it's not such a terrible thing where all of these people are out there being haters about that. I agree. For the most part, most people, it's not an issue, you know, and they're trying to figure. Maybe people are trying to figure you out, and yeah, there's always going to be that small little percentage that you're not going to be able to change. But I think normalizing, to Jay's point, is important. So, my friends, we've had a conversation for a while. Parting thoughts, Mr. Jay Kim.
Well, no, I think that it's exactly right. I think by and large, you know, with everything else, it's the 1% of the 1% of the 1% that kind of puts a negative light on things, but the judge is absolutely right. You know, I mean, look at her numbers from the election. It was a three-way election, and she won it without a runoff. So it speaks for itself. And so it's not like it's not like we're just walking down the street and, you know, we're being like, you know, things are being thrown at us. That's not what we want people to believe. It's mostly 99%. It's mostly fine. You know, everybody's very professional, and it's not a problem at all. Like I said, in my practice, I never see it, never encounter it. It's when you get out there and you're kind of like in the public light for whatever reason, some people decide, and that's the 1% of the 1% that make some silly comment that causes us to have these types of discussions. But I don't want anybody to think that this is something that is weighing on me every day.
Right.
I don't want this to be that. It definitely needs to be talked about and addressed, and hopefully with additional education and familiarity and normalization, it won't be such a big deal. But by and large, it's been wonderful.
Agreed.
So that's all I have to say.
Agreed. Your Honor, parting thoughts?
I just want to say thank you for having us, for having this discussion, and recognizing Asian American Heritage Month. I think even that in and of itself is just such a wonderful part of our community here in Broward County, and I just feel very blessed to be able to share the stage with both of you and have a discussion about something that is a part of me. So I thank you for the time, and hopefully people didn't think we were too boring. So
No. So thank you both. I appreciate you. I know that you're both very busy, so I appreciate you taking the time. And hey, Broward and Florida, we are proud here in Broward County to celebrate the different threads that create that blanket, that quilt that is America and American history. And so this is Asian American Heritage Month, which is an important part of our culture here in Broward and in America. And we celebrate it. So thank you, Your Honor, and thank you, Jay.
Thank you for having us.
thank you.